Hello everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Compression Thinking series. My name is Ethan Berry and I'm joined by Robert Doc Hall, co-founder of the Compression Institute and Professor Emeritus at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. Doc's career started in engineering and manufacturing. His experience in these fields is what paved the way for his realization that current business models are contributing to the destruction of our planet. How do we get along without leaving too much of a mess? How do we adapt to a changing environment? Well, these are some of the questions Doc has been asking his entire career. This series is about how you can help to make a difference by making nature a stakeholder in your business or community. To do this, we need to change our values. But before we can do that, we need to change the way we think. If you enjoy this series, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Doing so helps us spread this program to more people and more communities who may benefit from the message. Now, you may be wondering what we mean when we use the word compression. Well, in the context of this podcast, compression is a reference to the squeeze we are putting on nature. To ease the compression of nature, we need to compress the way we live. Compression thinking is a guide to help us do just this, hopefully before it's too late. So how do you become a compression thinker? Well, you'll just have to keep listening to find out. Today, Doc and I are going to be talking about transportation. It's one of those things that needs to be reformed. The problem is obvious, solutions aren't. If our goal is to cut energy use, considering that 25% of our energy is from the transportation sector, it seems like a good place to start. So Doc, where do we start with this? It's one of those things, it's hard to escape from.
Yeah, well, that's the reason we decided on this topic. Transportation is a big waste multiplier. We'll get into that. And so it only uses 25% or so of the world's traded energy, which is most of it's fossil, some hydroelectric and so on, but vehicles primarily use fossil energy today, gasoline and diesel mostly. Begin with sort of the illusion that we can resolve this by improving unit efficiency. And then you compare that with how we think otherwise. Suppose you could take our vehicles and you could double the fuel efficiency. If you drove a lot more miles or put a lot more of those vehicles on the road driving and doubled the miles driven, you've accomplished nothing.
Yeah, you're not really making any difference.
No. And that kind of incremental thinking is ordinarily the way we think about it and don't see it. And one aspect of that is the total number of vehicles, sometimes just called the fleet, the active fleet. Well, there's something a little over 1.4 billion registered vehicles in the world today.
How many are we projected to be adding to the roads in the coming years?
Oh, it's expected to go up to way beyond 2 billion, in 10 years. In between 2010 and now, we have added about as many vehicles to the global fleet as we had total fleet in 1980. And the way you think about it is market. What's the market? In fact, Googling will get you that 1.4 billion number pretty easily now. 10, 15 years ago, people didn't think about it. It was hard to find. You had to pick around.
You're building this fleet and you're kind of structuring the country around this mode of transportation, and that is dependent on the energy required to, get it to stay running. What's the return on energy for our energy resources?
Well, petroleum globally has been going down for quite some time. That is, the earliest sources tapped had returns on energy of 101, that is, or more than that. For every barrel of energy you spent getting it, you could get 100 barrels back. And if you want the fun one, it's the old scene from the Beverly Hillbillies where they just took a pan and scooped it off the ground. Doesn't get easier than that. But if today you got to drill 3 miles down and another 2 horizontal drilling someplace under the sea, that takes energy. And so that's another whole conversation, but just suffice it that none of the alternatives are really great in return on energy. And
What do you think about electric cars?
well, the energy's got to come from somewhere, and so the electric one's usually a little lighter. That makes it a little more energy efficient all by itself, but still you're moving a lot of mass, and the energy comes from somewhere, maybe a coal-fired fossil plant. And so you remove the pollution from the city street on which you drive, but you got the CO2 going in the air somewhere else.
Well, why do we keep, you just mentioned we're projected to be adding a ridiculous amount of vehicles to the roads in the coming years. Why do we keep adding to the problem?
Well, it's competitive marketing. Just take vehicles alone. The original Model T Ford was a pretty simple machine. Today, you've got huge numbers of parts and all kinds of materials in one. And now, a sloppy calculation I made years back was that the number of parts in a vehicle today exceeds those in a Model T by 10 to 15 times. So not only are there more of them, they are more complicated with more complicated materials in them. The performance is tremendously improved. And a vehicle today, if you take care of it, might go, let's say, 300,000 miles. The average Model T scrapped out at 60,000 miles. Well, they don't make them like they used to, and maybe that's a good thing. But what's the downside of all that? More weight. So you compensate for your improved fuel efficiency by putting bigger vehicles on the road and having to move more weight. And it's hard to stay ahead of that game technically. And the industry thinks growth. There are about 6 major vehicle companies in the world. There's more coming on from China. But each one of them, from the viewpoint of investors, if their sales drops, if they're shrinking the company, this is not good. And so almost from the beginning of the industry, they haven't thought about how many total vehicles are out there. It's how many are we selling new each year. And right now, that's about 80 to 90 million vehicles a year worldwide. So we're adding at a pretty good clip. The vehicles last longer, so you don't take them out as quickly. On the other hand, vehicles are recycled.
How much of a vehicle is recycled, though?
Maybe 75-80%.
Well, that's a pretty big number. Let's say it's 80%. Somewhere in that 20% of the car that's not being recycled is tires, which is a huge problem. How's tire pollution harming the environment?
Well, tires have been a significant problem. If you just sat tires without doing anything to them in a field, they get water in them, then they breed mosquitoes. People have tried to bury them underground. At least 2 cases I know, you got a huge underground pit of tires that catches fire, and it, at least one case took it over a year to put that fire out. It's an intense heat. So most of them are shredded. Some of the shredding is used for, included in aggregates for asphalt roads and so on, but not very much, and most of them are just burnt. They burn very hot, and they burn pretty clean if you've got a real high heat on it. And so that just adds to the CO2 of the air. When they are burnt, the ashes are taken to landfill.
What is it about the design of a tire that makes it so hard to recycle?
Well, it's a composite of stuff. They still have natural rubber in a lot of them. Acrylonitrile, butadiene, styrene, ABS is a chunk of the rest. They're black. The carbon black helps the grip. There's a whole science, tires are engineered. Sometimes they're even engineered for a specific vehicle for specific conditions. And so a lot of different kinds of tires. And so you got this huge variety out there. And once you have this composite, it's hard to get all the stuff separated to recycle anything. Might recycle a little bit of it if you can isolate a polymer, and that's about it.
So talking about waste, talking about tires, CO2, one of the things not a lot of people think of is there's also waste being produced in the process of just manufacturing the vehicles in the first place.
Oh, yes. The total supply chain consumes a lot of energy, and particularly if you're building a real fuel-efficient car, I didn't make the calculation. I saw one talking about a Toyota Prius, a hybrid, very fuel-efficient, like 55, 60 mile a gallon now. But should I buy that, or should I just keep driving the one I have now? Interesting question. And the conclusion was maybe you're better off for the planet if you just don't drive much. Keep driving the one you have now. It's already been made. That energy's expended. And a Prius might consume 30, 40% of its lifetime energy use just in the building of the thing.
So far we've been talking about cars, but if we're looking at this, from a top-down perspective, it's not just cars, it's also planes, trains, it's just the engines in general, right?
Yeah, all the way from huge engines and big ships down to the little putter that's in your weed eater. We don't know how many engines are out there burning fuel.
So is the waste, is that caused from like a flaw in the design of the engines, or just the source of energy that we're using?
Well, the problem is the CO2 going in the air and all the energy being used and the transformations that enables. Without internal combustion engines, we would not have industrial farming, for example. And so you can go look at all of the applications that we've used for this, and it's transformed us, and it's hard to get away from it.
Yeah, that farming is a great example of that. I hadn't considered. You're right, we are all dependent on it. I had to drive to get here, The automotive layout as it stands, it's hard to exist without a car.
Oh, yeah, and you could have a sort of tight communal living if you don't want to do very much. But just to make this series of podcasts, I sloppily estimated we were burning 44 to 50 gallons of gasoline total, or some motor fuel, and well over 5 million BTUs. So, yeah. So we think we're doing it for a good cause. That's the logic. But we're still burning it. And then you got all the infrastructure necessary to support vehicles.
Oh, yeah, the roads and bridges, the parking lots, all of that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of cities estimate that 50% of particularly their total downtown area, is streets and parking garages. And so all of those take energy to build and some to maintain. Parking alone is an issue because parking lots nationwide are typically underused. That is, if people drive into work in the morning, that nothing's on those parking lots, or not much at night. Look at the big arenas and the parking lots around them, and they're only filled when there's a big event there. And so you got the waste and the driving, and you just look at the average Walmart parking lot, for instance.
Oh, yeah, they're never more than a quarter of the way full unless it's Black Friday or something like that.
Oh, absolutely. And so you put in all the parking lot, you change the nature of the surrounding area to put in parking lots, you may create yourself some drainage problems. It just goes on. one of the, well, two things to bring up. One is the complexity of maintenance on today's cars. I know when I was your age, I'm 82, you're 23. When I was your age, I'd change a tire in 10 minutes, 15 tops. Today, if you had a flat driving with a special tools required and so on, it's probably a call to AAA, more energy burned. There are all kinds of jokes about having to pull the engine just to change the fuel injectors in it or spark plugs. That is a problem nationwide with car dealerships today. It's having the trained techs and keeping them that are capable of doing this, and you can't do anything substantive on a vehicle without having the computers and the diagnostics to tell you what's going on with the thing. It's not like, remember a 1960 truck where I could crawl into a pickup. I could crawl into the engine compartment and stand next to the engine and work with it.
As the technology gets more and more complex, it just becomes, less and less practical for everyday people to be able to work on their own vehicles.
Oh, yeah, the age when the kids worked on vehicles is past. My kids did. Most of the kids your age just can't do much with a vehicle because they're too complicated. And then let's talk about more waste with all that. Oh, well, while we're into this, talk about 5G. Driverless vehicles and 5G.
Yeah, when we think of infrastructure, we often think of the physical, what we see, but there's also that digital infrastructure.
Yeah, sometimes it's just ordinary traffic lights that are computer controlled, but the dream now to make driverless really practical and simple is to bathe the roadways in 5Gs, and the cars can talk to each other, and they can talk to things along the road, and that makes it very simple. With that, you could even have a driverless car drive in the snow for you.
Yeah, and that sounds really amazing, but we should also be a little cautious, right? We shouldn't be too in love with the hype.
True, and it's another case of needing to exercise the precautionary principle. 5G has stronger radiation than the 3G or 4G preceding it. And so if you had all that all over the country, you're bathed in more radiation all the time. We don't know what that does to people, maybe even short-term, much less long-term. That hasn't been investigated. So the medical researchers are trying to blow the whistle on this and say, whoa, wait a minute, before you deploy all this, maybe you ought to think about what the effect is on health. And something not really declared is if it affects human health, what does it do for animal health or even plant life?
Yeah, but that's unfortunately not how we do things, right? You think ideally the burden of proof that this isn't a dangerous product should be on the companies trying to roll it out. But oftentimes we're left to pick up the bill, right? And deal with the consequences.
You're left trying to clean up the mess later, and if something killed you, well, you can't clean it up. And that's, we need a much more conscientious application of the precautionary principle. Right now, a lot of things just get neglected in the forward stampede because we got to get better.
Yeah, and I don't want listeners to misconstrue us as we're hating on the technology, because that's the perspective some people might have, but we're just trying to, like you said, exert caution.
Yeah, I grew up with the technology. I was a great fan of it. And there's nothing wrong with technology. It's what you use it for that counts. And we need a lot more thought about what we use it for and what the backlash from nature and elsewhere might be from it.
We were talking about maintenance of cars earlier, and that made me think of the maintenance it takes to upkeep the automotive layout we were talking about earlier. Has there been any calculations or numbers people are throwing around trying to figure that out?
Oh, in total, probably not. I mean, cities talk about their street maintenance all the time, And I know there's a stretch of highway not far from me where the truck traffic's so bad that I see they almost have a state highway crew positioned on that road at all times. But other than that, there's a long history of adding vehicles, particularly around cities, and being unable to expand the road network fast enough to keep up with the traffic. And so one of the hazards of having a vehicle now is it doesn't do you much good if the road's just a big parking lot.
Yeah, and I've heard it said that once you expand the roadway, traffic just eventually is going to grow to meet that new space, right?
True. I think you can see it right here in San Antonio. That you look at all the roads going in, and it's not very long after the road gets expanded that, you're back in traffic jam again.
Let's talk about the fragility of this system, this layout we have. One, it's dependent on a finite resource that fluctuates. A lot of our energy we get is from the Middle East and not the most stable region at this point in time. Also, a lot of our food is trucked in from across the country, across the world even. Are there any other flaws you see in this?
Well, you're beginning to get the cybersecurity one. There's actually been a few cases where somebody that was a hacker could crack into a electronic car that was not driverless. It was just a production car now, and shut the engine off while it was going down the road. And so, what are these things? Are you the driver of the vehicle, or are you being conveyed by something that's partially a piece of a grand electronic system today? Or if you think about maintenance of these things, it's hard to maintain one without having the download of major mechanical components and the software that's in a vehicle. If you don't have that, you're kind of lost figuring out what's going on. It's the demise of the shade tree mechanic. And so we're almost complicating ourselves to death with the vehicles. And you add all this stuff. Every time you add more parts and more features and more everything, there's more to maintain.
Mm-hmm. So it's obvious we need to change, but to do it takes like a massive effort. So we employ these kind of psychological tricks on ourselves, right? We increase the mileage of a vehicle, or they created the hybrid vehicles, electric cars, and it's kind of this incremental change, but it's not really getting the problem at its root.
No, why do we think we need to haul stuff so far? Or I was talking with a farmer at the Indianapolis airport a good many years ago when, it was kind of pandemonium and a big number of flights ready to go. Look at everybody running around, and he says to me, how come all these people got to be someplace they ain't? And that's the question. How come we got to move so much stuff? How come so much we want to be somewhere else and we just have to get there? We love our cars because you can go point to point. You're not waiting on public transit, no transfers. You think you can get in and you can go where you want to go and when you want to go there, and when you're ready, you can come back. And that's why we love them. There's one reason. The other one, you turn your vehicle into a personal statement of yourself and things like that.
So what's the solution to this, you think? We're talking about how ridiculous it is to be shipping things in from across the country when you could just as easily grow them. Do you think a localized economy would be a more sustainable option for people?
Sure. If more things are made and consumed locally, you don't have to move this. You don't have as much stuff to move, and you don't have to move it so far. There's a huge difference between bringing in grapes all the way from Chile. I've got one friend that engineered that process. And just picking a grape right off the vine in your own backyard. There's no packaging. There's no moving. You don't even think about all the stuff that we have done with the energy just so we can eat an exotic fruit from way off somewhere else.
Yeah, you also know what's going into the food, right?
Well, you're more likely to, yes. And so that's another whole issue. Thinking energy, not time, that's, if you're talking about, we're here in San Antonio. Well, how far is it to Houston? Oh, it's about 3 hours. How far to Dallas? Oh, maybe 5 hours. We think our own time. We don't think how much energy we're burning, and a lot of us don't realize how much energy we're burning. We got lights on in this place. It's pretty common now for people to just leave lights on. They don't think about it.
Mm-hmm. They don't think about the embedded energy within every object, right?
No.
Look around the room we're in right now. Everything that's in here, it took energy to make it.
That's right. And it took energy to make the vehicle. Took energy to move it. If you're just talking about the nature's way of moving things, in its own way, it's very efficient. One more point. That is, if you could express this so people that are very, very dollar-oriented can understand it. Suppose you woke up tomorrow morning and gasoline was 10 times higher, let's say $20 a gallon, and you had $1 a kilowatt hour electricity. What decisions would you start to remake in a big hurry?
That changes everything, doesn't it?
It does. We have to stop thinking that energy is either free or cheap.
And that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed listening to this, please feel free to join us in our weekly teleconferences where we discuss the problems you and your community are facing while trying to think of possible solutions. The problems we're up against are way too large for any one person to tackle on their own. It takes all of us coming together. These dialogue sessions happen every Tuesday. You can participate by calling the number provided on our webpage. Times, topics, and the number to call are all found under the Compression Thinking Series tab on our website, www.compression.org. Also, please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If we're going to make a dent in some of the issues we discussed today, it will take all of us coming together, and your support helps. I know it feels as if we've merely scratched the surface of this topic, so if you're interested in learning more, you can check out Doc's many papers, videos, and book reviews at the same website, www.compression.org. Thanks for listening, everyone.